co-founder of DLA Ignite. Today I've got with me Rajini Lolay, and we're going to talk about non-violent communication. So just a little bit of background for everybody out there. I put details of this book by Marshall Rosenberg, the late Marshall Rosenberg, and I didn't realize until I read it what a life-changing book this is. It's certainly one of those where I put it back, I went, put it down and went, wow, that's amazing. So I put that on LinkedIn, and Rajina, basically, you responded and said, I know all about that. So I said, why don't you come on and talk to you about it? And here you are. So before we get into the discussion, why don't you explain to us where people can find you?
Sure. So I'm a transformational coach, and I help people really transform their relationship with boundaries and communication so that they can have relationships that work in their life and reclaim their time, their energy, their power, so that they can actually use that for the things that they really matter to them.
Yes.
People can find me on LinkedIn. They can search my name, Rajini Lolay. My coaching practice is called Restore the Giant. So you can also find me on Instagram if you type in Restore the Giant. And that's where people can find me.
So why don't you give us a bit about your background, about how you came across nonviolent communication, or NVC? Well, let's do that to begin with.
Yeah, sure. So my story with NVC came about because of some communication issues that were happening with my family. I've got 3 sisters, and we've come from a domestic violence background. So we grew up with an incredibly violent father. And, you kind of go along your kind of teens and then your 20s. And now we're kind of all in our 30s and 40s. We've started realizing that, we'd have these fallouts and they would last for a really long time. Grudges were being held, or we couldn't seem to get past the conflict that was happening in the family. Got to a point where me and my 3 sisters, we actually started to see a therapist. We had around 9 sessions with this therapist, and we couldn't have a different conversation. It was unbelievable, actually, because after 9 sessions, we had gone round in circles. And there were 2 things that we could agree on. One was that we didn't know how to do conflict well. We didn't know how to have conflict and repair from conflict.
Yep.
And the second thing we agreed on was the therapist wasn't helping us to have a different conversation.
Yep.
And it really made sense because we'd never been modeled, how arguments happen. We'd never been modeled how you make up after an argument and you kind of repair that and you get back to a place of love and peace. And it really made me quite interested in, okay, so how do you have those different conversations? How do you have conflict in a way that results in peace? And that really led me onto this trajectory of finding NVC. I ended up doing a year-long course. I have a mentor who I bring my stuff in life to every week. We do it with each other. And it's just amazing work that allows you to kind of see the world differently. So when you said it's life-changing, I definitely agree with you. It kind of changes your lens of the world from this person is doing this to me, I'm going to blame this person, to one where you can see that you've got needs and everybody else has got needs. And all we're trying to do is get our needs met. So it brings a lot more understanding in relationships.
And it also provides a language, doesn't it? A common language in which we can use to actually express those, and this is what my feelings are, and this is what my needs are, and then to use that as a way to form the commonality. And I can't remember what you called it in terms of the peace in terms of the conflict.
Exactly. So the framework it's quite simple, actually. It's really, really simple. The difficulty comes in actually applying it to everyday situations because we're constantly being triggered. There's often lots of emotions involved, and the brain is very quick and very reactive. So non-violent communication is really about kind of self-connecting, first of all, in situations, looking at, okay, how do I feel in this situation? What need is not being met here? It could be I feel disappointed, for example, and maybe my need for acknowledgement isn't being met. Um, and therefore, when I do have that conversation with the person, it could be somebody at work, for example, or it could be somebody in the home. I think this is quite a common thing between partners. You know, I'm always doing this, and you never never say thanks. I mean, what that conversation in an NVC format would look like is, hey, I noticed that when I've been out every week, I feel a bit disappointed because I'd really like for you to acknowledge that you do that. And you can already see that that's not blaming anyone for anything. That's really taking responsibility for your own feelings, your own needs, and you're really making a request of the other person.
Because you can see that just in the domestic environment, just a very simple thing like, so today it's Thursday, which is midnight for us.
Hmm.
And if you're the person that takes the garbage out, if you're in the States, and do it week after week or week after week, and no one thanks you for it,
Hmm.
it's one of those things where immediately it starts causing resentment.
Hmm.
And you love the person, and it sh- and and it shouldn't, and they're your life partner, and it shouldn't, and you should be able to say, can you just can you just thank me for going out and it's pouring with rain and I've got absolutely soaked. Can you not thank me? Well, but of course, what we do is we come in and immediately cause an argument.
Right, because we think that everybody should be a mind reader, and
Yes.
we also forget that, our needs are so subjective. One person might want an acknowledgement for doing something like that. For the other person, they might not really care. They might just do it and not really want acknowledgement or need anything. So it's really is about getting in touch with our needs and our feelings, and then making requests or finding ways to have our needs met. Another example that I really like to use is, again, if we use the example of kind of, you might have a housemate or a partner, for example, someone that you live with. Um, you might come home and you've had a really bad day at work and you really want to vent and talk about it. Your partner, on the other hand, might have had a really bad sleep the night before and wants to go to bed really early. You've got two people with competing needs here. Um, Commonly, the person who wants to come home and talk might get really annoyed. What kind of a partner are you? I've had such a shit day and I really want to talk about this. You don't care about me. So an accusation gets created there at that point, or even a thought in your own head. If we take this back to what are the needs of these two people at the moment, one person has a need for rest,
Mhm.
and the other person has a need for communication and connection and support, perhaps. Um, if we just look at those two needs, you can then start thinking of some strategies. So the person who needs to connect and have support, if you look at that need, you can find lots of ways of having those needs met. It's not just this one person that lives with you or is your partner. You can also now pick up the phone and instantly you've let this other person off the hook. They can go and have a rest and go to sleep. And there's no need for an argument. It's recognizing that you've got this need and it's your responsibility to find out how to fulfill that need. It's not somebody else's responsibility. So that's another example of how NVC can be used in a place where conflict could occur, and a really good way of kind of just taking responsibility of what your needs are so that it doesn't occur.
There are in this book. There's a whole bunch of lists, aren't there, about certain
Yes.
words that you can use and that it offers up as examples.
Mm.
Because I don't know about you, but even though I could have a fairly big vocabulary, actually expressing my feelings and feeling and expressing my needs we're kind of pretty much, most of us are pretty rubbish at it.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and actually, it's a so building a vocabulary of feelings. There's 2 pages of
Mm.
words, things that astonished, blissful, composed, cold, concerned, confused, splendid. But it kind of gives you this whole bunch of vocabulary that we can dip into that we probably are not used to using.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like that you highlighted that, because from the work that I'm doing and all the people that I speak to, I feel like lots of people really don't understand their own feelings. We're always doing things. We're always kind of plastering over how we really feel. We're always avoiding, and therefore the way that people describe their feelings becomes quite basic. I used to be at the point where all I could say was, "This feels good. This feels bad," or like the most basic. I'm angry. I'm sad. You lose this quite like rich nuance, and therefore, if you can't say how you really feel, how can other people really understand you? How can you feel understood? Um, I actually I actually recommend with my coaching clients, and I still do this with myself, is to actually look at that list throughout the day. I just check in the morning or in the evening, and I might look at that list and say, okay, how did I feel today? Or how do I feel right now? Um, and it really helps me kind of place those emotions, and it helps me become a lot self-connected, um,
Yes.
and have that vocabulary to actually express how I feel.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that quite often what happens is that um, our vocabulary grows in different areas because we're told as adults we tend to work in a very factual world.
Mm,
And even and when we go to business, we tend to work in a factual world. We're the number one supplier of toilet rolls and 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 we don't then actually express our feelings. And most of the things that happen in the business world and what we do is about, do you want a cup of coffee? Do you want a cup of tea? And it's a and we can kind of write emails because we know the language to use. But you probably wouldn't necessarily use the word jittery or radiant or thrilled. We tend to fall into. I'm reading these up, reading that,
mm,
and we tend to fall into using the words that we use every day.
mm,
It's for me. I found that really interesting, and I agree with you. It's kind of one of those things. I remember when I first came across the I don't know whether when I first came across what's now termed affirmations,
mm,
and if an affirmation being, if you want to be somewhere in 5 years' time, what you do is you write that down on a piece of paper, and then every day you get it up and you read it and say, I want to be I want to be an actor in Hollywood. And what you do is that as you read that every day, you get closer and closer to that goal
mm,
because you actually say, that's what I want to be. Therefore, that's you start thinking about those things. And I think if you started to read these or started to use this list, you would start to be able to use those words
mm,
um,
mm,
in more deep, more during the when you were speaking and having
mm,
conversation because
mm.
you were seeing them every day. Spellbound or inspired is a kind of word that's kind of used quite a lot, but um, unglued.
Mm. And how interesting and more poetic would life become if you were using words like radiant and unglued and thrilled and things like that? It just provides more nuance, and it allows, yeah, a greater understanding of yourself and others.
So one of the things that the book talks about is about expressing anger.
Mm.
So what's your feelings about expressing anger? How can you help us on that? Because I
Yeah.
think it's something that we all suffer from.
Yeah. I think with anger, there's it's even more important to kind of sit down and to really think about what is going on underneath the anger. At that point, it's very, very important to self connect first. Anger is a very explosive emotion. If you don't self connect first, you run the risk of having a conversation without really knowing what your anger is about, and pissing off the other person, accusing them, blaming them. It's like a firework, basically. Self connection allows us to come back to that list. Perhaps there's another nuanced version of why you feel so angry. Um, Sometimes, actually, most of the time, what's underneath anger is either sadness or fear.
Mm.
And that self connection allows us to actually, what's really underneath this anger? What do I really want to communicate? What do I really need that's underlying this anger? So you come back to how do I really feel? And then what's the need that's not being met here? So, is it my need for appreciation? Is it my need for fairness and justice? Is it my need for an acknowledgement? Again, there's a list in the book where you can actually pinpoint what those needs are. Okay, so if those are my needs, what do I really want? What's going to help me feel that way? And that will then become your request.
Yeah.
So, and that's another part of MBCs is it's not just internal. You actually then begin requesting these things of the
Yes,
work.
because I think some of the things with anger is that firework, which is it's but and it's like and what do you want from this?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
the work really becomes first of all catching things, because the other work I do is around people pleasing and lack of boundaries. And what I see there is that because people don't say anything for such a long time, when they do say something, it's like absolute rage
mm,
and carnage, and that isn't productive either.
mm.
So it's the timing of the conversation. It's having conversations with people before they get to that stage. Um, and also, let's not forget that very few productive conversations happen in a place of anger. When we're angry, the prefrontal cortex of the brain actually switches off. You're in flight or fight mode,
Yep.
and you stop processing things. This is why you can be saying very reasonable things to somebody who's angry. They cannot hear you. They cannot actually take in what you're saying, and that's a physiological thing that
Yeah,
happens.
it's a fight or flight
So
thing.
is that often really good to kind of when people are in that state of anger is to not have that conversation at that point.
Mm.
Um, Come back to it, calm down a bit, come back to it when you can think more rationally. And that's nothing to do with character. That's another thing that people kind of get confused as well. It's biological. You cannot have a conversation that's productive in a place of anger.
Yeah, I know. I'm a big fan of Bren Brown, and she when she tells the story of her and her husband, which is that she comes from an upbringing of where the family would have big arguments, and her
Mm,
husband didn't. So her husband, it was his boyfriend at the time. She would basically go into having an argument, and he would back off.
mm,
And there was this assumption, where they'd have an argument, and they would base part of the argument was about talking it through. They'd then go back to life, where he saw this argument thing as being conflict,
mm,
which is a strange thing. We've had a great comment here from Blake. Blake Kendrick is actually coming on this podcast to talk about RevOps in a couple of weeks' time. It doesn't quite fit all on that. I find being very deliberate with word choice is important. And on the other end, if you're receiving words, even if you think you understand your counterpart, starting with a statement of, so I'm hearing you correctly, you are saying, and I need to go back to here, and rephrase in a way that would allow them to check your understanding.
yeah.
I think it's important in a lot of conversations, especially in leadership, which is where you ask for, so what did you, can you confirm what you just heard? We've
Mm,
been in so many meetings. I remember one of the first board meetings I had when setting up this company was that our chairman said, in business, there's two contracts. There's a contract that you sign, and there's a psychological contract that you made in your head. The classic example is where someone says, if you come and work for me and work really hard, I'll give you a promotion. And of course, what I think is working hard and what you think is working hard could be two different things. So when you come back 2 years later and said, I've worked really hard, you say, we haven't done anything. And that's because there wasn't a definition of what working hard was, and that's more of a business environment.
Yeah, but it's a very good example because it just shows that people's understanding of things can be very subjective, and especially when we're communicating, and not everybody is at the same level. That's the other thing. If I link back to what you just mentioned with Brené Brown and her husband, and what Blake's comment is about, is people have different blueprints of communication, conflict, of what different things mean. And so Blake's absolutely right in the sense that ask those questions. Am I getting it right? I'm hearing that you're feeling frustrated. Is that correct? And the person may say, no, I'm feeling actually quite disappointed. And that becomes a different conversation. And I think this is really especially important for people who are in positions of leadership, or people who perhaps have done some self-development work. I found it really difficult when I was applying NVC to my life, because I started to see how much people were not using NVC because they hadn't done the work. The other part of NVC is listening empathetically. And so that becomes really important when you are interacting with people who haven't done this work. When you are a leader and you do need to understand your team, it becomes really important to listen for other people's feelings and needs, to help them make a request that's actually going to absolve their need. It's actually going to help them in some kind of way. And it goes back to that point that you mentioned. We kind of need to do that because so many people are disconnected from their needs and feelings. When you can help somebody kind of identify what they need and the feelings behind them, that becomes a really productive conversation and facilitates so much understanding between you and that person.
Yeah. The 20 minutes is up.
Wow.
I told you it goes really, really quickly.
And we could have gone on and on, because
I felt we could have gone on and on.
Yeah.
But the 20 minutes is up, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight and sharing your expertise. I mean, for me, it's a fascinating subject. It's something that I'm going to carry on investigating and learning, because I just think it's, we always need, what's that saying, that we need to be our best selves. And I think there's a great opportunity for us all to be better at dealing with people, listening and being empathetic and all of those things. And I just think it's something that I need to work at.
Absolutely.
It's a weakness.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong skill, and there's always going to be nuances in the different situations and people. And it's something that you kind of really need to commit to for the sake of having really fulfilling, meaningful relationships that are authentic.
So remind people where they can get hold of you.
So you can find me on LinkedIn. If you search my name, Rajini Lolay. You can get me on Instagram, Restore the Giant. And those are the best places.
RestoreTheGiant.com, is it?
That's my website. And Instagram, it's just at Restore the Giant.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on today and talking about NVC. I find it fascinating, and I appreciate you coming on. And if you're still there, Blake, thanks for your comment as well. So